Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming again for an exciting discussion by community leaders with me and with the president, David Carlisle of Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science. This topic today is so important, and we're right on the edge of voting for lots of important offices. And you don't usually think about voting in the context of healthcare, but the people we vote for are the people who take care of the measures that we want legislators to vote for. So we have to care about it, and we have to learn about the wonderful people like we're going to listen to today who are working on enhancing our participation in voting so we can vote for the things that make healthcare, quality care, available to us all. I'm going to start by introducing who our participants are in a little more detail. Ashley is with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, which is an esteemed civil rights organization based in New York City that's been around a very long time. She has worked in criminal justice issues, education equity issues, and voting rights issues at the Legal Defense Fund. She's an honor graduate of Williams College on the East Coast and Columbia Law School, where she served as a Harlan Fiske Scholar and notes editor of the Columbia Journal of Race and Law. She's a member of the trial team at LDF, which is litigating cases challenging, for example, Texas School District racially discriminatory hair and grooming policy after 2 students were suspended for failing to cut their locks. She's also a part of the team of Arnold and Barbers Hill Independent School District, challenging in Texas a racially discriminatory, no, not Texas, I talked about that, talking about the client's death sentence in North Carolina, Racial Justice Act, which I'll get her to describe what's going on there. That's a huge thing where her work has given hope to hundreds of minority defendants sentenced to death. So it's very, very dramatic work. Ashley is just an outstanding leader, and we're so pleased to, this is our first engagement with her today, and I hope we'll be friends after this for a long time. Now, Lydia has been a friend of ours through mutual friends in Southwest Voter Education Project for some time now. She is a dynamo. She's the president, recently elected president of that organization. And Latino leadership in democratic processes has tripled under her lead, from 5.4 million Latinos registered in 94 to 18.6 million in 2020. That's really just breathtaking. President Clinton appointed her to be Chief Executive Officer of the 2020 Democratic Convention. Locally, she served on Villalobos's campaign here in LA. She's on the board of the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, and she's featured in the Movers and Shakers Election Campaign magazine. She's been featured in the LA Times and in the Hispanic Business Journal. She received the Lifetime Achievement Award in Community Service from the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund. So welcome, both of you. Rounding out our panel, of course, is our esteemed president, David M. Carlisle, MD, PhD, who's been president at CDU for 12 years now. He's a published author in health policy, quality of care, medical education diversity, and elimination of health disparities. He's a board-certified internal medicine specialist, a graduate from the East Coast like you, Ashley, from Wesleyan University. And he got his MD and PhD in health services from UCLA Fielding School of Public Health. Before he came to us, for 11 years, he was director of the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development. So what a wonderful group of people to discuss how we're going to take care of our communities by exercising our vote. Let's start our conversation. We're going to talk about voting suppression. Voting suppression ranges from very blatant, very subtle, and we don't pay as much attention to it as we should. You pay more attention to it in Texas and in North Carolina than we do in California, but I'm sure we have some of it going on right here in California. Let's start, just a second. Wait a minute. Let's start with you, Ashley. Tell me about LDF and give us an overview of some of the laws that are on the organization's radar right now.
Yeah, sure. So thank you so much for having me, and excited to chat with everyone today. So the Legal Defense Fund, we are looking at laws that impact the ability to vote and how votes are being counted. And so voting laws can essentially be divided into two buckets. First, the ability to vote, right? So those are laws that perhaps, touch on voter ID laws, stringent voter ID laws that are impacting communities of color, laws that are looking at, how to cast absentee ballots, laws or policies that are looking at poll closures. So the Legal Defense Fund is paying attention to those types of laws. And then we're also paying attention to laws that impact, once you cast your vote, how much weight your vote is being given, to ensure that under Supreme Court precedent, that each vote has nearly or practically the same weight. That provision or that law is known as one person, one vote. So, when there are maps drawn, maps in states or districts where there is gerrymandering, that could be racial gerrymandering, partisan gerrymandering, which essentially dilutes certain communities and their voting power, then we are also looking at those types of laws. And so we have our policy team, we have our organizing team, as well as our litigation team, working to combat voting suppression in both of these arenas. And then just briefly, two examples of cases that the litigation team has worked on. One is Merrill v. Milligan, where we challenged the way that Alabama redrew the redistricting map and argued that there was vote dilution amongst the Black community. Another voting law that we challenged was one in Florida, where we challenged a provision that was limiting, where, when, and how voting drop boxes can be used, and also criminal penalties for, providing food or water to those in line to vote.
I'm so glad you are addressing those issues. We have them here, a little bit different now they're harassing people going to drop boxes. Ms. Camarillo, please tell us about Southwest Voter Registration Education Project. And I'm hoping that you can help us understand what steps your organization has so successfully taken with unregistered voters. What are some of the most common reasons why they've not registered?
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be here with such a distinguished panel, and it's an honor to be here, Mr. President of this wonderful university that's preparing men and women to take care of us, really. I mean, you're advocates, you're keeping us healthy, and our health is very, very important. So let me start by first saying that Southwest Voter is a product of the civil rights movement. In 1968, when a group of Latino lawyers who were all, at the time members of LULAC, were feeling a sense of discrimination, a sense of displacement, a sense of whatever they did with this organization, the membership organization, they were not getting anywhere. So they decided to have a conversation with several leaders, one of which was our founder, Willie Velasquez, in 1968, to start an organization modeled after the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And so they started MALDEF, which I did work at MALDEF. I was on the board, and just a correction, I'm not currently on the board, but I did receive their civil rights, their community award, which it's a very high honor for me. Willie who was a lay person, not a lawyer, but understood that we needed to do the organizing and the voter registration, suggested that that's what he was going to do, and began to organize and register voters with a folding chair, a folding table, a rotary phone. Some of you may not know what that is, but those rotary phones existed, and a phone book. But very quickly, every single year, he was basically denied the opportunity for the organization to become a 501c3, a tax-exempt organization, because the Nixon administration had blacklisted him for wanting to register Mexican Americans throughout Texas and other parts of the country. So there began the very essence of starting the organization, began what we're fighting, right? Discrimination. When then in 1974, the organization was finally given the opportunity to be a 501c3 because the MALDEF president intervened and helped us fix that problem. As soon as Willie became president, and I mention this because it's a long history, he was trained by Congressman John Lewis to register voters because we didn't know how to register voters. So he was very clear to go and ask, how do we do this? So he did start at that time with the idea that Latinos had the same interest that the Black community had, which was to empower their communities by the vote and through the vote, and when necessary, file the lawsuits. Very quickly, Southwest Voter began registering voters and frankly, dividing the communities between MALDEF and Southwest Voter to see what systems we would change from from at-large member districts to single member districts. And then we had a lot of firsts. The first school board member elected, this first mayor, the first council member, the first. And we started in San Antonio, Texas, and then we moved across Southwest, and then later Georgia, Florida, other states. So I'm very, very proud to tell you that since Willie opened the doors in 1974, formally, we have been working with other communities and ourselves to register voters. Since we opened our doors, we have registered 3 million Latinos and partner with other communities to make sure, including the NAACP Voter Fund, to do some of the work that we need to do in the various communities. Second, we have trained 150,000 community leaders to run for office, organize, and be leaders within communities. Some are currently elected members in office. Others are running nonprofits. Nonetheless, our goal is to develop the leadership in such a way that they would care about the future of their communities and the interest of their communities. Last but not least, we have filed 210 voting rights lawsuits, and we have several pending. One of them is the Arizona, because they purged 100,000 Latinos because when they first registered to vote, they were not citizens, much like what happened in Texas. We sued Texas on that. We sued Texas on the voter ID, and we sued Texas on just about everything you can think of. Lately, the most recent 2 cases was the redistricting case, which I'm the chair of the Texas Redistricting Task Force. And our case is LULAC versus Abbott. In the last redistricting cycle, we sued Texas under the congressional and state house districts. This time we sued under the congressional, state Senate, state House, and state Board of Education, working with other communities. One of the things that we value is the values of what we're doing. And one of the values is to, yes, the work on redistricting, draw the maps, submit the maps, and sue if we need to, which is what we did, but also work with other communities so that they can sustain the gains that they have made. That is one of the rules that we established quickly on when we organized the Texas Latino Task Force. We also sued.
Let me stop you and ask, how many people work with your organization? It sounds like you need the whole U.S. Army. How many people?
No. We're a small nonprofit like everybody else, but we function like a campaign. What do we know about campaigns? We're nonpartisan. You have a small core group that's doing the thinking, the developing, the raising the resources, and then you hire people to do phone banking, to do block walking, to create. Well, actually, part of the core team is the one creating the messages that we do in social media, and they vary. We vary from campaign to campaign, from year to election year. For example, we thought it was important that we contact 52,000 voters in Georgia when the 2 U.S. senators were going to be going before a runoff, and Latinos helped to make a difference. Latinos and the Black community and other folks assured or made sure that the current majority leader became the majority leader. So those are the things that we're doing. So no, we're a small organization. But just to finish, the Senate Bill 1 is another bill that we sued. I had wanted to sue Georgia on their bill where prohibiting us from giving water and food and other portions, that other elements of that bill, but it's other groups were already doing that. So we moved on to other states. But I have to tell you, the folks that I'm working with right now, including the chef who helped me take food in Georgia and Arizona and Texas in 2020, is ready for us to get sued by taking water and food to the folks in line so that they can stay in line. To your question,
you're giving the state of Texas a whole new reputation. This is wonderful to hear. Let me move on for a moment to Dr. Carlisle. Dr. Carlisle, you have experience with health policy as an author, working for the state of California, and of course, as president of a medical university. Tell us, how do elections shape health outcomes in communities like South LA and across the country? Is this just a Texas, Alabama situation, or do we need to worry about this in a broader sense?
Well, thank you, Sylvia, and greetings to my fellow panelists, Lydia, Camarillo, and Ashley Burrell. Good to see you, good to be with you. I would say that elections and voter rights are the most visceral element of our representational system, our policy system. Fortunately, we have a type of government that is more or less responsive to the voters' edicts. And when you look back on the history of voter rights and civil rights, there's been no more visceral component of our campaign for civil rights in this country over the past roughly 100 years than voter rights. And it's no surprise now that we're starting to see erosions in individual rights in this country, that we're starting to see the component of voter rights being infringed upon the greatest. If you extrapolate this or bring it down to the level of healthcare policy, policy is basically government. Health policy is implemented through government. When you think about the fact that 1/3 of Californians receive Medi-Cal insurance, and probably another 20% receive Medicare, you've got the majority of people insured in the state of California under governmental programs that are the product of governmental policy, that is a product of our election system. So it doesn't get any more real than this. If you want to disenfranchise a population, disenfranchise voting rights. If you want to enfranchise a population, make them strong voters. And I think that's the bottom line.
Ashley, you're used to addressing voter rights from a legal lane. What impact have the courts had as a guardrail protecting democracy? Should we be worried about the conservative shift in the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, and in lower courts?
Yeah, so, courts play a crucial role in upholding democracy. And I think that the shift that we've seen in the recent years, both at the state level and federal level, is very real. And we can see that in many of the decisions that have come down, particularly this summer. Overturning of Roe v. Wade is just one of many examples. And so I think this question really gets at, why voting is so important, because while federal judges are nominated by the president, state judges who are making crucial decisions, for most states, I believe 30 out of 50, these are judges that are elected at some point. So sometimes they are nominated by, some sort of commission, but to remain in their seat, they have to be reelected, or they need to be elected from the get-go. And these judges are deciding issues in terms of redistricting. They're looking at racial gerrymandering. They're looking at partisan gerrymandering. They're looking at campaign finance issues. So, I think it's just points to why it's so crucial to vote in every single election. And when you're looking at, who's running for these positions, doing your research, supporting people who are running for these positions, judges hold a role where they should be nonpartisan. We know that often that is not the case, but I do think that when there is pressure from the community, when they know that they need to be reelected by the community, that we can hold these judges accountable.
You raise such an important issue. It's not just who you vote for president or governor. You have to go down the list some, and you have to know what the people down the list are responsible to do as it impacts whether you get your health care, you get your health insurance. And who is informing us of the names of those people and the jobs that they're doing? And how do we get to know that? Can you, Lydia, is that something that your organization helps people know? Because they're not always names of people that are in the paper or on television. How do we know these are the men and women that we have to be sure to elect or not to elect?
I have to tell you, I'm owning the responsibility of sharing with you that I don't think any group, including ours, does an excellent job or a significant, respectable job of educating the voters on the difference between all the judges. There's so many of them. But at least we do try to let the voters know, as part of the communication we have with them, whether it's by at their doors or phone banking them or with social media, that there's judges that they're going to be voting for, and that these judges are deciding from criminal offenses, or I should say, if you smoked a joint, you might end up in jail for so many years in some states. I know that's not the case for California, but there's many states where that's an issue. So we do make sure that we tell them, from as well as other areas that we end up using judges at the local and state level. And of course, the most impactful courts, as far as I can tell, are the Supreme Court of the United States, which at one point was fairly balanced. The fact that it's 9 members, we will never be balanced, or at least I don't think it's ever been the majority until now, where we have 6-3 members who will more than likely not vote in the interest of communities. The redistricting case, when we filed in 2011, I wasn't worried about it. I figured we would win. We're represented by Maldiv, and the lawyer Nina Perales and Tom Sainz are extraordinarily excellent attorneys. And this is one of the areas that they're experts in, thanks to Joaquin Avila, who serves as, we call him the redistricting voting rights grandfather. But the Supreme Court, after the Shelby ruling in 2013, basically said America has no more racism since we elected a Black president, which we all know that's not true. And we have to have a situation where Congress will reauthor the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And that's a call to all of you that are listening. We must demand that our senators, our state senators, and if you have family in other states, particularly red states, you have to ask them to make the call for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act to pass. When that passes, we will have, again, states that will be listed under Section 4 that will demonstrate that there is still discrimination. Clearly, Texas is one of them. Alabama, I mean, we can go on and on and on when we see this. Even some parts of California, we need to have protection and then allow us to go back and use Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which allowed us to complain to the Department of Justice and block any kind of voting problems, whether it's they dropped a voting site, they didn't pass out different languages so we can vote in our ballots, anything, including the redistricting. So I think that that we have to do a better job of informing folks, not only of who's running, but also down the ballot where all the judges, because those are deciding life-term commitments to our communities.
Ashley, are the community activists in the southeastern states addressing these issues? Do we have comparable organizations that are lobbying to make sure people vote and make sure that they know who they're voting for?
Yeah, the ACLU definitely in every state there's an affiliate. There's an ACLU unit in most, I think all 50 states. There are. And LDF works with a lot of community organizers to provide, educational materials about just making sure that when they go to vote, that their vote is being casted, making sure that when they fill out their ballots, that, they're doing everything correctly so that their vote is being counted. So there are a lot of on the ground organizations working on these issues, but sometimes it's a matter of resources. It's a matter of, in just numbers, right? So there might be a lot of nonprofits in the major cities in the South, but once you get to the rural areas, who is sort of contacting or reaching out to those communities. So while I think that there's definitely organizations, national organizations that are making sure that they're going to specific states or on the ground organizations, there are definitely communities that are in need of additional information to make sure that their vote is being counted.
I'm speaking as an old dog from the 60s. So many of the civil rights attorneys of the early civil rights movement have passed on. Julius Chambers in North Carolina, John Walker in Arkansas, and those were the voices back then who kind of spoke truth to power. And I just wonder, who stepped in leadership? Is it the legislators? Are the legislators the leaders now of community advancement? Ashley, are they?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that we can really look back and name who those leaders were, at the forefront of this fight for, the right to vote. And I think our generation, I don't know if most people can sort of name who that person is, who is sort of leading this fight. I think that there are individuals that are speaking to these issues for sure, and organizations that are addressing these issues for sure. But I think if you would ask most people just, who is sort of leading this? I don't know if they would have an answer, but I know that for sure the Legal Defense Fund and other organizations are trying our best to, empower people to vote, to show that it does make a difference, to show that it is a pretty great feeling when you go and cast your vote and know that it matters, that people died for this right, and that it's so important that we continue to exercise this right. And that it will make the difference for our lives and generations to come. And I think that with the past election, it really sort of mobilized people. The next presidential election in 2024, I think, is going to be crucial. And this election coming up in 2 weeks really is a test run to make sure that everything goes as it should, to make sure that an election can't be overturned, to make sure that people know that our communities are getting out there and we're not going to be deterred. So I really just encourage everyone to figure out where their voting site is, figure out if they're working that day, if there's early voting and what that looks like, and just making sure that they cast their vote and are encouraging family and friends to do the same.
Well, we do have many more people today than we had in the old days of civil rights advocacy. So, I mean, we have spread out the sense of importance of engagement, I think, more widely across the board. Dr. Carlisle, CDU has undergraduate and graduate public policy degree programs to create future leaders at, among other places, local, state, and federal health agencies. What role can medical and non-medical universities play in preparing these students to navigate in sometimes hostile political and electoral climates in their future careers?
Yes, that's a very good question. Thank you, Sylvia. One correction, however, technically speaking, since this is a defined academic discipline, public policy, that is, we don't really have public policy degrees or programs at CDU. We have public health, but in a larger sense, one of our major pillars at the university, one of the CDU advantages, is health policy. So every student that comes through the university receives or is imbued with a health policy perspective going forward. But no, technically we don't have a policy degree, just for the viewers to recognize. But getting back to this advantage, this is one of the things that makes CDU different. Before we had, I think, our current degree of electoral representation in the state of California and the county of Los Angeles, our healthcare system suffered. We had large urban populations that were not able to get access to healthcare. This has not entirely gone away by any means, but we're much better off in terms of our ability to access county healthcare services, in large part because of the political empowerment of previously disenfranchised populations in LA County. This is something that most students at CDU, especially in our public health area, have some understanding of, some familiarity with. They know the role of public policy. I teach a seminar in public health where one of the things that we go over is the concept of, excuse the title, one man, and it could be, one person, but one man, one vote. And when this was implemented in California, all of a sudden you saw a very significant shift in the political center of gravity from the far north rural part of California to the urban southern part of California that had by far the greatest population. So these things are keys to societal betterment. And again, this all comes down to the right to vote, voting empowerment, and voting enfranchisement. And I think most students at CDU have some awareness of this issue and of its impact on healthcare.
Ashley, how would you describe the current tide in terms of the role of redistricting, gerrymandering, and is playing in your efforts to empower minority voters? How bad is the current state of vote dilution for the elections in a few weeks?
Yeah, so that is an area of the law that right now is sort of up in the air. Lydia talked a bit earlier about Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. So the Voting Rights Act was a major piece of legislation that came out of the civil rights movement. And Section 5 made sure that certain states where there was a history of discrimination, before they repassed redistricting maps, they had to go through pre-clearance. And essentially what that meant was the DOJ, Department of Justice, had to take a look at it and make sure that it wasn't disenfranchising certain communities. That was overturned in Shelby in 2013, the Supreme Court case. And what the court said was, don't worry about it. You have Section 2. In case there's any sort of discrimination, there's Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Now that is up in the air. That is a case that the Legal Defense Fund is litigating, and a member, the lead on our team, argued before the Supreme Court approximately 2 weeks ago. So Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act essentially allows plaintiffs to bring forth a claim of race discrimination in a redistricting map. And if the results show that there's discrimination. So it is a test, or plaintiffs do not have to show that there was intent, but if they can show that there are discriminatory results, that, along with other requirements, is sufficient to bring forth a claim. And this is important because a lot of times nowadays, when you see race discrimination, people are a lot more careful when they're not saying, yes, we're creating this law to disenfranchise X community. They're not blatantly saying that. And so Section 2 allows communities to bring forth certain claims and argue that there is vote dilution in a community. Essentially, the test to bring forth a Section 2 claim is what is before the Supreme Court and what the Legal Defense Fund is arguing. We first brought this case in Alabama in the district court in front of a panel of 3 judges, 2 who are Trump appointees. They held that they believed that there was vote dilution. They believed that the map that Alabama drew was diluting the Black community, specifically the Black belt of Alabama. The state of Alabama, however, appealed this decision, and now it's before the Supreme Court. And unfortunately, what that means is the maps that Alabama put in place, those are the maps that will be used for this next election. It's to be determined how the Supreme Court will rule. We really do think the facts are on our side, and the lower court thought so too. But I think that's just one example of redistricting and the importance of it and the power it can have in diluting the vote. And again, I think that just goes back to why it's important to vote, to put pressure on the courts to say, we're paying attention to these issues and to, sway them to do the right thing.
Well, at least you got those 2 lower court judges on your side. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, we won, and we won at the district court level, and so we hope that is a good sign in terms of showing that the facts.
What's the name of this case in the Supreme Court now?
That is Merrill v. Milligan.
All right, so we all have to keep a lookout for that decision.
Yeah.
But good that you're on that team. Thank you for fighting that. That's a heroic battle.
Of course, yeah.
Lydia, similar question for you. How has redistricting been impacting your organization's efforts, which are heroic, to get voters out? It sounds like earlier you talked of huge numbers of new voters coming out. Is that by having a community organizing approach to getting voters out?
Yes, thank you for the question. It's always hard to say what motivates voters without having a survey and getting a clear sense of what they're thinking.
Yeah.
But we do know several things. We know, for instance, that California has grown in terms of its registration numbers across the board, all groups, because they're registering to vote. The deadline is the 24th of October. or same-day voter registration as well as automatic voter registration. That is not what's happening in Texas or Arizona or Georgia or Florida. It's 30 days out. What we learned when Proposition 187 passed in California, which had to do with how immigrant communities were treated, was that voters were registering 30 days out, and then we all began to work to change that. When that happened, you began to see California electing Latino and Black and Asian elected officials who have the same interest as the communities, and began to change many, many laws. That is not what we're seeing in some of the states. Clearly in Texas, there was a time when Texas and California had equal numbers of Latino registered voters, 2.7 million, 2.6, 2.8, it would just fluctuate because people move, people die. However, the change of the law in California changed dramatically, and now it went from 2.8 million registered Latino voters in California to 5.3 million registered Latino voters. In Texas, it stayed the same forever. It's one of the very frustrating. There's a lot of systematic barriers. Texas is the superstar state of racial discrimination, racial profiling. I know the other states are similar, but Texas is a leader in that area, and other states follow suit. Much like California is a leader in progressive politics, and other states try to follow suit. I'm happy to report that because of the Trump effect, and I'm going to call it the Trump effect, I know we're all nonpartisan here, but the reality is that people are worried about the policies that the Trump administration passed, including blocking Obama's healthcare plans in before the Supreme Court and the courts. So that effort plus the work that we've been doing, in spite of the voter suppression and systematic barriers and the work that we're all doing, we now see that there is going to be 1 million more voters that are Latino that are going to cast their vote in Texas. So now, instead of being 2.8 million registered Latino voters, it's basically going to be 3.7 million registered Latino voters, and we think another million voters will cast their vote. It is very interesting. I think what happened in California with Proposition 187, we called it the Pete Wilson effect. I think that's what's happening around the country. We also think that this cycle, in spite of the fact that it's a midterm cycle, and only about 50% of those that are registered to vote will cast their vote, that may not be the case in some areas that are competitive, like Arizona and Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, where the Senate seats are not only competitive, but also the women may end up doing what Kansas saw in the election. It's too early to tell. I know we're only like, what, 20, actually less than 20 days out, 2 weeks away from today for the election. But I think that we urge all of you to fight on the ground by voting. Take your family to go vote, make it a holiday, then go have some enchiladas or some chicken, I don't know, whatever you want to have, but go take the family to vote. In California, because I'm sure most of you are from California, you're clearly studying in California, you could do what my mom does. You know, all of you received your ballot in the mail. So you have a dinner and all the family comes together and you all work at figuring out who you're going to vote for. That way, it's not, it's a lot easier to see this whole list of people and propositions that you're going to vote.
There has to be somebody at the dinner who knows who's on the ballot.
Well, then you assign it to somebody.
Okay.
I have brothers and sisters. In my case, it would be one of my sisters or myself, but I would definitely assign it. And I'm telling you, it's so much fun because you bring the ballot home.
It's a very good idea. I think it's a very good idea. And I hope people will hear that and say, let's have a voting ballot party and talk about it, and then assign people, you know, at different levels. What levels should they be assigned at, Ashley? What, some people assigned higher and other people more local, or how would you?
Yeah, I think that's such a great idea. As you were saying that, Lydia, I was envisioning, you know, dividing up different people to research, and then whoever is assigned to, you know, whoever's assigned to whomever presenting like, okay, this is this person's policies versus this person, and this is what you should know about this person. And really just, helping to, educate everybody, because sometimes the list can be very, very long and can seem overwhelming. And, access to information, I think with the internet, sometimes it can be overwhelming, but if you, make it fun, it's a great way.
That's definitely going to be a takeaway from today. We're going to have voting parties, and maybe Dr. Carlisle, we could ask our students to volunteer to be the one organizing that within their families, and then to come back and report how that went to the larger body, to make it an annual CDU voting effort, to educate and empower ourselves and our families. What do you think? Could we do something like that? I think that would be very exciting for us.
Yeah, certainly the term student activism and the term voting rights kind of go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. When you think about our freedom riders in the Deep South working on voting rights in the 1960s, the early 1960s, many of them, maybe even most of them, were students. So yes, there's a major role for student activism, even among health profession students. I mean, we aren't against students of political science necessarily, students of law, but even our students, our health profession students, recognize the role of voting rights in producing a better healthcare system. And so therefore, I would expect our students to be engaged, as they are on many other issues like homelessness, in voting rights activism. And so that's something that we can work on for sure, absolutely.
Well, the homeless issue is so difficult. This is not an impossible undertaking. We could do this. Our students could do this. Mm-hmm. And I think it would alleviate a sense of hopelessness politically. Here's something that we could actually actively do. Mm-hmm. And then measure the results, see whether the candidates that we urged our family and friends to vote for made it through. And if they didn't, we change and do it better the next time. But it's a level of engagement that you don't have to give up your studies to be a physician, give up your studies to be a nurse to do. It's not that heavy obligation. It's doable. It's mm-hmm. doable. Well, I want to turn, before we leave, just to one or two questions that we got from our audience. Imani is asking, what about all those big corporations reporting record profits? Have they been an ally in this struggle with their influence and power? Can we as consumers somehow send them a message to join the fight? What do you think, Lydia? You're doing you need a lot of support for all those armies of people you organize.
I think we all do. I always tell donors to donate to Maldiv, Southwest Wood, or other groups, and NAACP, Legal Fund, and we all need it. I'm sure the universities need it as well. But I think that our power in the vote is extraordinary. So is our power with our purse, and we do have an opportunity to. I'm not suggesting boycotts because we've seen that some work and some don't work. But it is important that you send out a letter to your favorite soda company, your favorite toothpaste, your favorite this, your favorite that, and ask them to donate to your favorite organization that's fighting for voting rights. They're not going to fight for us, but with money we can do more. How many more can we contact? How many more can we talk to? How many more can we register? And how many laws can we change? The minute that the Texas and other states have same-day voter registration, you're going to see dramatic changes, but that's not going to change unless we all work at it. We have to work it by registering voters. We have to work it by talking to legislators and having them change it. And they're not going to change anything unless it's people who care. So your vote matters and your purse matters. Use them both. Use them both to change and make a difference in your communities.
DeAndre wants to know, what do I do if I show up to vote and am told I am not registered for whatever reason? Ashley, what should that person do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I think, before you go out to vote, make sure you have a plan. Go on your state's website, right, and look at what the requirements are for voting. Look at what you need to bring. You can check to see if you're registered. If something happens where they say you are not registered, I know, for example, that the Legal Defense Fund, we actually have an online portal, our website, where you can submit that issue. And all of our lawyers, the election week, we will be, monitoring our website and monitoring issues that come in to help in any way we can. So that's vote.naacpldf.org. And so we will be doing online monitoring. We will be doing poll watching to try to help out. And so also, if you attempt to vote and for whatever reason they say you're not registered, I would say go ask someone there, if they can double check. That's probably the first thing. Ask them to double check, make sure that, they have the spelling correct. And then after that, I would say figure out, plan B in terms of making sure that you have someone or an organization to contact. And sometimes you can do a write-in ballot as well to hope that your vote is being counted, and then follow up on that to ensure that your vote is counted.
Good suggestions. Dr. Carlisle, I think it's hard for all of us watching what's going on in the political arena to sometimes not get frustrated. It seems like every election these days, they're closer and closer. Every vote matters, but some of the ones that we really wanted just don't pass. How can we encourage people not to be discouraged, but to keep going, keep plugging away at what we know has to happen?
Well, there is that great quote about the arc of justice, and I'll probably not get it correct, but I think it's basically that the arc of justice is a long arc, but eventually it moves in the right direction. I know that's a misquote, and maybe one of our it bends. Yes, can quote it more accurately, but I think that we've seen this in action in the United States. I mean, we've made significant changes over time, and compared to where the United States was 100 years ago, compared to where the United States was 200 years ago. And these changes are coming about through our political system, which is, of course, a democratic political system. We don't always get what we want, but I think that when you compare our system to so many others around the world, this is a much enlightened system, and it's generally working positively despite setbacks, including some significant recent setbacks. And I would encourage everyone to despite their frustration, which can at times appear to be overwhelming, don't lose that sense of engagement, because it's that engagement that sets our country apart from so many others. I think leads us to a better trajectory in that arc toward justice.
Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Carlisle, and Ashley and Lydia. This has really been just a wonderful conversation about such an important topic and the very important work that they're both doing in nationally and locally to empower communities who have a voice, who have the numbers, who can change things by engagement in the political process. And I am so happy for CDU students to consider the work that you're doing as part of the public health mandate that they will leave CDU with, to be engaged in the political process. That the political process is part of keeping ourselves and our communities healthy. Is that right, Dr. Carlisle?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll thank you all, and I'll thank all of our listeners for being online today. Look for us again on November 10th with another forum. We enjoy so much hearing from diverse leaders in our community about what's going on outside our four walls. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye-bye.